More South Africans are seeking help as their debt burden is growing due to rising interest rates and high inflation. According to new data by DebtBusters, 40% of people need help to deal with debt now in comparison to the same period in 2022. Joining us to give an insight into this is Benay Sager, head of DebtBusters. Benay, I appreciate your time this afternoon. Sobering thought, the state of people's credit at the moment, if you will. 40% are in need of some form of support. Just unpack that for us, will you?
Yeah, we reported on our debt index, which looks at the debt counseling applications we received at DebtBusters in Q1 2023. And we've seen a 40% increase in terms of the inquiries of consumers looking for help. Not all of them end up going to debt counseling, but that just shows you the demand that's out there in terms of the services. And essentially what we are seeing is probably two major things impacting consumers up and down the income chain. The first is inflation, which has been running at a very high level over the last 12 months particularly, and now we're seeing more and more food inflation, probably made worse by load shedding. And secondly, the rapid increase in the interest rates. Now, you have to remember interest rates have increased by 425 basis points in a short period of time. And what's happening is that many of the consumers who would have assets are really struggling to make ends meet in terms of paying for those assets because asset pricing is linked to, the interest rates. And I think the third factor is perhaps the fact that we're finding salaries have not really increased in a meaningful way. So all of these things are combining to really put the consumer under quite a bit of pressure.
Now, you speak of individuals that come to you seeking help. What sort of help are they looking for?
I think often individuals, unfortunately, know that they do have a problem in terms of dealing with their credit. And what I mean credit is all good until it's not good anymore. And I think what happens is there's a tipping point when your credit that has been so healthy and so good for you, it becomes a bit of a burden. And at that point, you start thinking of it as debt. And I think often the individuals who come to us are looking for a way to alleviate the debt issue. And it becomes sustainable. So often the situation is one where something unexpected happened over the last few months, or there was a slow burn, as we call it. And I think the last interest rate increase has essentially, put them over the edge. But what they're really looking for is these are responsible consumers who are trying to make ends meet. At the same time, they want to pay back their debt. So they're looking for solutions to help them pay back their debt in such a way that is affordable for them. And I think that's predominantly what they're looking for.
Are solutions typical, or is it based on client-to-client need?
So the solution, the crux of the solution is the same, but it's like customizing a car. Debt counseling is one where it's long term, but how long depends on how much debt you have, what's the nature of the debt, and how much can you afford to pay on a monthly basis. So for some consumers, the solution, if they are over indebted and eligible for it, for some consumers it could be as short as 2 years. For some consumers it could be 5, 6 years. In some cases, even longer. The typical, what we see is around 4.5, 5 years in terms of when consumers finish. But it very much depends. The guidelines of the solution of debt counseling is more or less essentially the same. The debt counselor that you would appoint works with all your creditors and tries to restructure your debt in an affordable way that is, that you can repay back over a long period of time.
Well, your response would suggest that there's got to be a minimum threshold for you to approach DebtBusters, for instance, for some assistance.
No, actually, for debt counseling, you need to, as a consumer, you would qualify for debt counseling if you meet two conditions. One is that you have to have a source of income. Usually this is a salary or, a slip. The second thing is you have to be paying, in terms of your net income, it needs to be less than your expenses plus your debt obligations. So we have to be able to see that you're unable to meet your debt repayments. We have to show that. Otherwise, creditors will not accept the application. But if you meet those two conditions, it doesn't really matter what your income level is. It just shows that you're struggling to repay back your debt, but you want to. And I think the solution is there for you.
So coming back to that issue, are we talking about people that are failing to pay off their bonds or mortgages or repayments on vehicles, or is it people that owe creditors for clothing accounts or telephone accounts, for instance?
It's actually all of the above. I think our typical consumer profile is one where there is a bond. Sometimes there's a vehicle, but almost every single time there's a personal loan. In fact, if you look at our debt index, you'll see that we indicate 96% of the applicants had a personal loan. So basically, that's virtually everybody. So often that also comes with a clothing account. In most cases, it comes with a credit card. Sometimes it comes with payday loans and overdraft facilities. So it's a combination of all of them. In some cases, there is no bond or vehicle finance, but almost always there is a retailer account, there's a clothing account, there's a personal loan, and so on. So I think the beauty of the solution is one where we take a holistic view and do a thorough assessment to help the consumer across all of their debt obligations, as opposed to cherry picking one over the other.
Now, when you look at that sum total that you eventually have to pay back, how much larger is it than the initial amount? So, for instance, if a person owed 40,000 rand and they have to pay it over a period, how much are they eventually paying back?
Yeah, so this is a good question, because often what happens is if you take out a personal loan for 40,000 rand, over generally that's going to come with somewhere between 22 to 24% interest rate per annum. So you'll end up paying somewhere between 80 to 90,000 rand in return when you pay that back, when you normally take out a loan. So when we see consumers, often they come to us around 24% interest rate, 24% per annum interest rate for unsecured loans, about 14 or 15% for vehicle finance, and about 11 to 12% for bonds. What we do is we basically take a snapshot in time, like let's say what the balances are today, and we work with creditors to basically try to make it in such a way that it's affordable for the consumer to repay back. And in most cases, creditors actually reduce the interest rate because they want to make sure they get their money paid. So when we look at consumers, actually, over the course of this solution, over 90% of what they pay goes to creditors. And in most cases, they save, in terms of interest, they no longer have to pay. They will save, several thousand rands in terms of the next few years.
So let's talk about those that default. Do you get many defaulters in your line of work?
So we have consumers, after the application process, we have some consumers who stop paying. I suppose that's one way of defining default. That does happen. And unfortunately, that's a function of, as we would call it, life happens. What we try to advise consumers is it can happen to anybody. I mean, the most common scenario, particularly with COVID, was a lot of our consumers either had their jobs completely cut or their salaries severely reduced. And what happened was during that period, we would always tell consumers, if anything changes in your situation, inform us immediately so we can work with your creditors to try to restructure your debt again. In most cases, that's possible. In some cases, it's not possible. So not everyone who starts the journey finishes it, unfortunately. So there are some people who default. But generally, about 1 in 2 end up completing the process, which we think is quite good. We would like that to be more. And, we keep urging consumers to make sure that they keep up with their payments so they can take advantage of the solution.
So we've talked a lot about those that succumb to the issues around the debt crisis at the moment. Let's talk about preventative measures. I mean, what sort of advice would you give to prevent people from walking into your offices, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's the way to think about it. In the end, we want at DebtBusters for consumers to be sustainable when it comes to financial situation. That's our job. But there are a lot of things I think consumers can do to prevent. Firstly, I think if you are thinking about an asset, let's say buying a home or buying a vehicle, understand what your interest rates are going to be. I mean, know what your interest rates are. And when you're signing up for something new, like an asset, many consumers did in 2020 and 2021 when interest rates were low, understand how much more room you would need in your budget if the interest rates were to go up, let's say, another 200 basis points, and make sure that you budget for that. Don't just rush into it without anticipating. Interest rates go up, interest rates also come down. When they come down, that's great. So, but when they go up, you need to make sure you have some extra. Secondly, I would say for consumers, if you do have retailer accounts, clothing accounts, credit cards, overdraft, whatever it might be, go to your statement and find out how much interest you're paying. understand what are the different fees that you're paying, and make sure that those are within your comfort zone. And if they have some questions, try to understand how you can potentially change the interest rate or reduce it or whatever it might be. I think it's quite critical we understand the cost of credit. And I think lastly, I would say everyone talks about budget, but I mean, budget only works if you do it holistically by accounting for everyone in your family. So I would say go through the bank statements of every single individual in your family for the last 3 months and look at all the different charges that you have, all the different things you're spending money on. And then ask yourself, how can you make the situation more sustainable by making small changes? And I would say those are probably the 2 or 3 tips I can give to consumers to start somewhere.
And a final question for you. What are the implications of being on in fact, of coming to your offices, obviously getting support, through DebtBusters? What does it do to your line of credit? I mean, once you've paid back whatever it is that you owe, are you cleared?
Yeah, so when consumers apply for debt counseling, if they choose to do so, we have to notify all the credit bureaus that somebody's applied, and we'll continue with debt counseling. During that period, we tell consumers upfront also that they will not have access to that line of credit because they're trying to demonstrate they can pay back the amount of money that they owe. When they finish with paying all their unsecured debt and vehicles, excluding bonds, because bonds are long-term and those are treated a little bit differently. As soon as those are paid up, so to speak, there's a clearance issued, as you rightfully stated. And within a month or 2 of this, credit bureaus are meant to update the status. And the National Credit Regulator is very clear in terms of the regulations that were published in 2015, that there's not meant to be any record of any consumer to have ever applied for debt counseling, because it shouldn't be used as a black mark against you, so to speak. The whole point of it is that this is a consumer who's done the responsible thing. They realize they want to pay back their debt, but they are unable to do so at the rates, and they want to actually honor the obligations. So to make sure that these consumers are not prejudiced in the future, once they get the clearance, once they paid up all the unsecured debt and vehicle finance, the information on them at the bureaus as well as the lending institutions is made to be scrubbed off. Now, I don't know, I'm not an expert in this topic, particularly what happens there. But, if in case there are situations where that has not happened for a consumer, I certainly urge them to talk to the National Credit Regulator or the Credit Ombudsman to make sure. But the whole point of the solution is it allows one to get a fresh start once they're finished with the process. And we certainly hope that that will be the case for many consumers.
Benay Sager, head of DebtBusters, appreciate your time this afternoon speaking to us as 40% of people need help to deal with debt now.